First, my brother made my life unlivable, and then he made my wife pregnant. Now that our parents have disowned him and left their legacy of $2 million to me, he is asking for my assistance. I have always been the target of David, my younger brother, who has always held a deep-seated anger for me. Jealousy is not the cause of the situation, contrary to what you may believe. He, and not I, was the child who was favored. It was completely unnecessary for him to be envious of me. In order to provide you with some background, our mother was always kind to David. Among all of our children, he was the most precious. Both his meals and his wash were prepared by her. Even went so far as to ask me to assist him with his school coursework. On the basis of the fact that we were related, I was supposed to provide assistance to him nevertheless. I was never given the same attention. I was completely self-sufficient, therefore I was able to accept this. It's possible that I was partially to blame for always catering to his requirements without anticipating receiving anything in return. It was only when he wanted anything that he contacted me, and he never assisted me when I was in need of assistance. In contrast to me, who was a shy and reserved child who preferred studying and spending time by myself, he was a boisterous and rowdy individual, exactly like our father. At the same time, I have a tendency to be upfront and honest, and I never try to sugarcoat. I have a strong suspicion that my mother may have formed a poor impression of me due to the fact that I am direct. David became the family's sweetheart as a result of this partiality, and because we were still growing up, I didn't mind it at all. The troubles, on the other hand, arose when he started tormenting me and making fun of me since I was completely different from him. In addition to making fun of my height, he would also make fun of the fact that I wore spectacles. By sneaking into my room, he would read my diary, and then he would complain to my mother about what I had written in my diary. They would laugh it off and say that it wasn't a big problem when I raged at him and complained to our parents about him breaching my private. I was upset that he was touching my personal space. He committed even more heinous acts, such as coming dangerously close to shattering my glasses and putting unpleasant items in my food. I was fortunate enough to discover the stones in my cereal before they could cause any damage to my teeth. He even placed them in my breakfast at one point. After I informed my mother about it, she laughed it off, stating that this is how brothers become close. In the event that we were in a disagreement, David would focus on my fears in order to belittle me. Since we attended the same school, he was aware that I was being bullied by a handful of the students there. He took the side of the bullies, calling me names like ugly loser and hairy monkey, and pushing them to physically assault me, stating that I was simply a big failure. Instead of supporting me, he helped the bullies make their point. Another time, while we were having a disagreement about something so insignificant that I can't even remember it, he counseled me to take my own life. While I was able to quickly shrug off the majority of insults, that particular one was particularly painful for me because I was having a hard time with my mental health at the time. Although I am feeling better today, it was quite upsetting to learn that my own brother despised me and wanted me to die, as a result of the fact that my father was frequently absent from work and my mother didn't appear to care very much about the situation. She even reprimanded me once, claiming that it was my fault for causing him to become irritated. There was a terrible event that occurred when David attempted to light my hair on fire when I was in high school. Unbelievably, our mother defended him by claiming that he was just playing. Who, in all seriousness, acts in such a manner? The good news is that my father eventually agreed with me and brought attention to the seriousness of the matter. He went so far as to threaten to report David to the authorities. In the past, my brother had never been forced to face any consequences for his conduct, therefore, this particular time was a tremendous eye-opener for him. My father made it abundantly obvious that enough was enough and that David needed to begin respecting his older brother. He was really astonished by what he had just discovered. After some time had passed, my father entered my room to have a conversation. The fact that he consistently told David how similar they were, which was true, meant that I never anticipated receiving his support. Dad acknowledged that he had waited for years in the hopes that David would mature, but he was gradually coming to the realization that David was becoming into a significant bully. Having this confirmation from my father was extremely reassuring, and I came dangerously close to crying out of emotion. In my confession, I detailed everything that David had done to me over the years, including the bullying that I had experienced at school. It was shocking to my father to see how much I had been through. The next day, he had a conversation with the principal to make sure that the bullies were informed about the harsh repercussions that would be incurred if they maintained their behavior. Later that evening, my father told me that I needed to be strong and stand up to bullies in my life, so he signed me up for mixed martial arts MMA at our neighborhood gym. I am the first to admit that it might have appeared ridiculous for a nerdy child like myself to be trying to learn how to fight, but I was very focused on the topic. I was able to successfully manage my schedule in order to maintain a healthy balance between my schoolwork and my daily workouts and the mixed martial arts lessons, drastically transformed both my life and my physique. When David got up to his shenanigans once more, it was one day. In exchange for our assistance with chores, we were given pocket money, which he stole from me. For some time, I had been putting it all aside. David entered my room without my knowledge and stole it. I was able to catch him just as he was going to leave with his companions on their bicycle. David made fun of me by claiming that the only thing I could do was run to my father for assistance when I requested that he refund my money. That I punched him in the face is something I have no idea what possessed me at the time. After he was rendered speechless and fell backward, I recovered my money from his pocket and then threw him back down. David started crying very loud, which provided a lot of comedic material. Nevertheless, my mother hurried out to seek assistance for him and to discover what had transpired. She was taken aback when she found out that I had fought him, and she punished me, telling me that I ought to be a better role model for David, who appeared to take pleasure in seeing me reprimanded. In addition, my mother expressed her dissatisfaction with my behavior to my father, stating that I required supervision. In a stern tone, my father demanded that both of us provide an explanation. When I told him that David had taken the money that I had worked so hard to earn and save, David attempted to justify his actions by claiming that he needed the money for a date and that I should assist him since I am his brother. On the other hand, David's father informed him that he was fortunate that I only punched him for stealing because anyone else would have contacted the police rather than me. He continued to inform David that he had no authority to acquire things belonging to other people without first obtaining their permission. David displayed his displeasure by throwing a fit, most likely in the hope that our mother would take his side, but our father remained unwavering in his stance. After David learned that he would not be punished for being beaten, he yelled out how much he detested me and then fled back to his room, where he locked himself within. In the aftermath of that event, David started to put some distance between himself and me. At long last, he had come to the realization that he could no longer intimidate me, and that even his father had ceased backing his outrageous behavior. For the first time in a very long time, I had the impression that we were on equal footing. In spite of the fact that he was no longer able to physically damage me, he continued to taunt me verbally whenever our parents were not present. He became increasingly irritable and short-tempered with each passing year, and his behavior deteriorated as he got older. When I approached him with a question, he would ignore me and walk away while screaming slurs like nerd or loser under his breath. He would eventually walk away. As in the event that he needed to convey something to me, he would do so by way of our mother rather than by directly communicating with me. In response to my inquiries regarding the reasons why David was unable to simply communicate with me, she would encourage me to be more understanding. I was unable to determine whether it was simply the effects of puberty or actual animosity. Dealing with his comments grew intolerable, and I yearned to leave and get away from him. I desired to move out. My mother always refused to arbitrate a sit-down session for us to address our concerns, stating that she did not want to get involved. I requested her to do this on multiple occasions, but she always refused. When I inquired about her thoughts on the matter of why David had treated me in such a manner, she would dismiss the inquiry. After some time, I finally went to the institution of my dreams, where I was awarded a scholarship for being the best student. In honor of me, my father planned a party, and even my mother appeared to be pleased. On the other hand, David continued to be unapproachable and remote, and he hardly acknowledged my accomplishments. I felt a mixture of enthusiasm for the future and relief to be away from the toxic environment that I had been living in at home on the day that I departed for university. It was a freeing experience to spend the first few months of college. During my time away from the restrictive environment of my upbringing, I was able to make new acquaintances, I found enjoyment in my classes, and I began to construct a life for myself. My anxiety about David's verbal assaults, which had been a constant, subsided, and I experienced a revitalized sense of tranquility. At the fraternity party that I attended during my second year, I was introduced to my future wife, Karen, by a friend, and we hit it off right away. Coming from a religious background, it was considered inappropriate to have children outside of a married relationship. When we found out that she was expecting during our final year of school, we made the decision to get married immediately after we graduated. Despite its modest size, our wedding was filled with happiness. Our parents were overjoyed for us, and we had a good day celebrating on their behalf. When I was in that moment, I was convinced that Karen was the love of my life, and in my mind. I had always pictured myself in a monogamous relationship, with only one woman to whom I could return home and share my life. In spite of the fact that other ladies expressed interest in me throughout the years, I never pursued anything like that, because I was completely pleased with my marriage. Karen was the girl of my dreams, and I never intended to cause her any harm. Nevertheless, I eventually discovered that there were 2 instances of adultery within our marriage. The first was a brief affair with an ex-boyfriend while she was visiting her family, and the second was a sporadic affair with her married coworker that lasted for several years. Both of these relationships were brief. Some people would consider me to be naive, and when I think about it now, I can't say that I fully disagree with them. Every time we were apart for a period of time, I made the decision to forgive my wife. I had the belief that we were capable of overcoming these challenges, and I did not want to bring up our child in a dysfunctional household. The affair with her coworker took place while we were both young, and I attributed it to the fact that I was a young person and had bad judgment at the time. For a while, it appeared that things were getting better. Even though I knew I would never be able to trust her completely again, I did my best to put my uncertainties to rest. I was aware that in order to forgive her, I would need to make a sincere effort to begin a new chapter in my life. Since it had been 4 years since her second act of treachery, I was certain that I had made the right choice when I decided to give her another chance. Karen appeared to have undergone a transformation, and we were really content as we planned for the future of our family. On the other hand, my life was destroyed once more 3 months ago when she disclosed that she had been having an affair for an extended period of time and claimed that our boy might not be mine. I was hit like a ton of bricks by the words that she spoke. I was overcome with a mixture of astonishment, betrayal, and disbelief. Thank you. Her confession was so profound that I had a hard time wrapping my head around it. Despite my state of confusion, I was able to inquire as to why she had concealed such a huge secret and how she could have committed something that was so heartbreaking. She exhibited a chilly and callous response, as if she were emotionally removed from the suffering that she had caused. Since her explanations were so ambiguous, I found myself with more questions than answers. Confronting. The broken trust and mistrust that I had about my own family was a moment that was both weird and terrible. Because I believed that I had a right to know the identity of the father of the kid that I had been parenting since the child's birth, I persisted in my efforts to ask Karen for the truth. At long last, she revealed that David was the culprit. I was so shocked that my eyes widened as I asked Karen what she meant by it. She went on to explain that she and David had become friends after I had introduced her to my family, and that she had stayed with us from Thanksgiving until New Year's. In contrast to his normal icy demeanor toward me, David was friendly and courteous toward Karen, which made me happy because I didn't want Karen to feel like she was not welcome. Since Karen's goal was to become a member of my family, she made it a point to spend a large amount of time with my mother whenever she could. Her observation of the rift that existed between David and me prompted her to inquire about it. I disclosed the fact that our relationship was strained and emphasized that it was possible that we would never be able to restore it because of his unresolved feelings. Karen understood, but she began to include David in our activities in the hopes that it would strengthen our relationship. All of the time that we were going to watch a movie, she would ask David, and we would watch whatever he had selected. The fact that David and I were able to communicate with one another throughout this period of time was a welcome change from his customary behavior of remaining mute. The fact that Karen and David were hanging out and playing video games together is something I remember, but I never gave it much attention. It was revealed to me by Karen that David had confided in her about his troubles and the recent breakup he had experienced. He was in a vulnerable position, so he decided to form a friendship with her. The fact that he would flirt with her in a way that was completely innocuous while I was not present was something that she mentioned, and eventually, things became out of her control. When I saw my wife and my brother sleeping together, it made me feel dizzy and sick to my stomach. The sudden decision that Karen made to go home, rather than spend New Year's with me, was a reflection of the fact that she admitted to feeling bad after the event, and that she separated from him. Even though I made numerous attempts to persuade her to remain, she was resolute about walking away, due to the fact that she was in her typical upbeat state. When we reconnected at campus following the holidays, I did not have any concerns about anything. After 2 weeks, we were informed that she was expecting a child. Karen acknowledged that she did not know if the child was mine or David's, and because she had no means to confirm it, she decided to stay with me, knowing that I was the more reliable brother. Our marriage was based on this reason. My world seemed to be coming to an end all of a sudden. It is possible that the son I adored is not even mine. When I questioned Karen if she had been having sexual relations with David in the recent past, she subtly nodded her head. As a result of the undeniable chemistry between them, she disclosed that they had never stopped communicating with one another. They would sneak away to hotels while lying to me about whether or not they had worked overtime. She acknowledged that she had used 50% of her business trips as opportunities to have romantic getaways with him. Karen responded that she did not want to be the one to end the marriage when I asked her why she had married me if she wanted my brother. She made the decision to remain because she thought I was a wonderful father to our son. According to her, she made a mistake and was unable to detect when it was time to stop. I expressed my gratitude to Karen for being honest with me, but I also informed her that I was going to pack up and leave. The moment she started crying, she asked for forgiveness, and she anticipated that I would yell at her. I chose to pack my clothes in a calm manner instead. Karen insisted that if I loved her, I should fight for her, and that mistakes are inevitable in every marriage. She also stated that mistakes are inevitable. As soon as she realized that I was not going to take any action, she shifted her strategy and stated that our son would be impacted by a divorce and that children should not be raised in homes where there is a history of conflict. She began to cry even more and accused me of being cruel after I reminded her that it was possible that I was not even the father of the child. Apparently, she was under the impression that there was no way that I could ever want to leave the marriage. I could be partially to blame for the fact that I allowed things to get out of hand in the past. Even though I did love her, I had the impression that my feelings for her originated more from the fact that we had been together since college, and that we had a son together. In spite of Karen's repeated assertions that it was not too late to make things right, I found it difficult to believe her and I had no more patience. There was a significant problem with trust, and her comments seemed empty. Even if I forgave her, I could never forget she slept with my brother. I've always believed in forgiving mistakes because we're all flawed, but this was beyond acceptable limits. I left her wailing on the threshold and checked into a motel. The next day, I went straight to my parents and confessed everything about my wife's affair with David, detailing how they had been covertly sleeping together for years. The shock on their expressions was apparent. True to her nature, my mother immediately sought to defend David, stating that her boy could never do such a thing to his own brother. Determined to expose the truth, I requested my parents to remain silent and let me phone David in front of them. I asked them to be quiet so I could catch David off guard, making him assume it was a private conversation. My confrontation with David regarding the affair took place when he answered the phone. His initial response was to aggressively deny it, and he refused to accept any responsibility for it. On the other hand, when I informed him that Karen had admitted to everything, he immediately began condemning her and describing her as lacking in character. In addition to asserting that he was the more attractive of the two brothers, he stated that it was not his fault if women were attracted to him. In a stern tone, I informed him that I would reveal his identity to everyone. I chuckled at David's arrogance and thanked him for confirming the truth, knowing that our parents had heard everything. When David made fun of me, he said that no one would believe me because he was the golden kid. When David was trying to explain himself and save his reputation, he became quiet and then spluttered. My mother, who was still in a state of shock, asked that David provide an explanation. He stumbled through a poor attempt to excuse his conduct, blaming everyone else but himself and desperately trying to shift the blame onto Karen. He blamed everyone else who was responsible for his acts. I was able to observe that my mother, who had previously shown her preferred son a great deal of protection, was now experiencing a mixture of disappointment and fury. It was during that tense moment that I experienced a peculiar feeling of vindication. I was subjected to David's suffering for a number of years. Now that the truth was known, the roles were put in the opposite direction. The actions that David had taken were laid plain for all to see, and David was the one who stood exposed. My father, who was often quiet in his sentiments, was unable to resist his dismay as David's sentences became slurred. It was then that he started talking to David, and he requested me to hand him the phone. My father started off by saying, David, in a tone that was filled with dejection, "The actions that you have taken constitute not only a betrayal of your brother, but also a betrayal of this family. Your brother's wife was the one with whom you had sexual relations, and you continued the affair even after they were married. The trust that we had placed in you have been irreparably damaged as a result of your acts, which have significant repercussions. Both of you were brought up to place a high importance on family, loyalty and morality. Your disregard for your brother's feelings and the lack of respect for his marriage are unacceptable," he said after pausing for a moment to let the weight of his words to settle into David's mind. "What you've shown today defies everything I've tried to teach you. You have not only caused him pain, but you have also severed the fundamental ties that bind our family together. Despite the fact that your mother and I share some of the responsibility for the person you have become, we will no longer put up with this conduct. You will no longer have access to the college funds that I established for you as of today. Finding a way to pay your university tuition on your own is something you will be responsible for doing. I will also quit providing financial support for your way of life. Do you believe that having sexual relations with married women makes you a more manly person? Let's see how you get by without my money so we can compare." My demeanor remained calm and collected throughout the entire ordeal. Despite the fact that I had the need to yell at David at first, the most satisfying sense of vindication came from seeing my father discipline him. What he really was had been revealed by me. Moreover, it was obvious that he had grossly miscalculated the repercussions. Despite David's constant protests, my mother continued to justify him. However, my father quickly canceled the call, which put an end to David's attempts to justify his conduct by providing an explanation. Not long after that, my mother came up to me and gave me a hug. Even though it had been a very long time since we had experienced such a moment together, there was an underlying understanding and support in that embrace despite the upheaval that was occurring inside the family. She expressed her regret for not trusting me even after all this time. The person I was when I was 14 years old could never have envisioned this moment. Being validated and accepted by my mother throughout this time. My father assisted me in locating a competent attorney so that I could file for divorce from Karen. Because I had a higher income than she did, she and her attorney attempted to fight dirty by requesting alimony. However, her affair worked out in my favor to a significant degree. Additionally, we carried out a paternity test, and the results made it quite clear that David was, in fact, the father of the child. The news was extremely distressing, much more so than the revelation that Karen had been unfaithful till now. I was enraged by the fact that the son whom I had cherished and brought up was not mine. But I made the decision to maintain my strength. Karen asked me to continue visiting my kid, claiming that he should not be penalized for the circumstance nonetheless. I was unable to endure to see him. The fact that he reminded me of David was something that I detested. As soon as my divorce was official, I moved into my own bachelor pad, and I immediately felt a wave of freedom rush over me. Being able to live by myself was a strange experience for me, because I had married at such a young age and had never really had the opportunity to experience independence. On the other hand, my naturally independent character enabled me to rapidly adjust to my new way of life, and I found that I looked forward to it with great pleasure. 2 weeks ago, now, I received a phone call from my father informing me that he was contemplating modifying his will, because he did not wish to grant David any inheritance. My father is quite obstinate, and once he made the decision to exclude David from his life, he did not waver from that decision. David made an effort to communicate with our parents, and even went so far as to show up at their front door, pleading for forgiveness, but they did not allow him to enter their home. My mother, who was the one who typically gave in to David's outbursts, appeared to be done with him, even though it must have been the most difficult thing for her to do. As evidence that he did not feel any remorse for his conduct, David did not send me a text message to repent for what he had done. Simply put, he was furious by the fact that he was cut off from our parents. It was my father who informed me that he intended to leave everything to me, so that David would not challenge it at a later time. Only $1 would be left for David. My dad had put in a lot of effort over his entire life, and my eyes widened in disbelief. When his assets, retirement fund, and life insurance were all taken into consideration, the total came to about $2 million. The sole stipulation in his will was that in the event that my father passed away before my mother, she would continue to reside in their home, despite the fact that ownership would be transferred to me following his retirement. Considering that I wanted to be there for my mother in her final days, I didn't mind this at all. David became aware of this, and because he was unable to get in touch with our parents, he telephoned me yesterday in an effort to make amends. It was stated to him that he was having a difficult time attending college, and that ever since Karen found out that he was the father of the child, she had been persistently requesting child support from him. He stated that he was in need of financial assistance and was looking for part-time work, but he was unable to obtain any. He pleaded with me to talk to our family about starting over because he was in desperate need of my assistance. As I laughed in his face, I informed him that I had finished dealing with him. My wife became pregnant as a result of his sexual encounter with her, and I told him that he ought to have given some consideration to the repercussions of his actions. It was David's contention that I was being unjust, and I concurred with him that Karen was partially responsible for the situation. I brought to his attention the fact that I had divorced her, at which point she became his responsibility. Due to the fact that these were the results of his own conduct, he should not be calling me to complain about either the child or the woman. After David began to raise his voice, I interrupted him and reminded him that he was no longer the beloved child in the family, but rather the black sheep who had slept with his own brother's wife. David's voice began to rise, but I interrupted him. It was at that same moment that David started crying and proceeded to explain to me how everyone, including our grandparents and other relatives, had turned against him. Although I was aware of this fact, it was no longer of importance to me. Having decided that I no longer considered him to be my brother, I informed him that we had reached our conclusion and that he should never call me again. I've been thinking about the talk over and over again ever since then. At least not since we were children. I had never heard my brother cry, despite the fact that I had a deep-seated contempt for him. Not going to lie. It did cause me some pain to see him in such a defenseless state, so I guess I'm here to inquire about whether or not I ought to discuss him with our parents, or whether or not I would be an idiot if I didn't do so. A good many of you have inquired as to the reason why I have severed all communication with my son Henry, and some of you have even referred to me as harsh. It is necessary for me to share that I do not feel comfortable being the parent of another man's child. This is not a circumstance involving a stepson. In the beginning, I was under the impression that Henry was my son. However, I later found out that he is actually the son of my brother David. Obviously, this finding caused me a great deal of pain, and I shed tears about it for several days. The fact that I no longer want Karen to be a part of my life is the primary reason why I do not want to have any contact with Henry. To re-enter my life, she will find a way to do so if I continue to have a connection with her child, and I require some privacy. In spite of the fact that you would consider me cruel or self-centered, I am unable to see him ever again, at least not for a very long time. I am writing to notify you that the majority of you correctly identified that it was my mother who notified David about my father amending his will. This prompted David to call me as a last resort in order to make things right. I confronted her in front of my father, and she broke down in tears, claiming that I had disciplined David sufficiently and that he had learned his lesson. If my mother believed that what David had done could be forgiven, then my father told her in a persuasive manner. After that, he was unable to continue his marriage to her since he would never be able to forgive her for such a betrayal. Due to this warning, my mother became silent. My father made it abundantly plain that she was free to uproot her life and go if she ever had another conversation with David, and we discovered the truth. My dad is a pretty obstinate person, as I indicated earlier. I have faith that my mother will grow from the experiences she has had. Reddit for the third update. 5 months have passed since the last time I updated this. Over the course of the previous few months, my relationship with my parents has become more positive. On a weekly basis, my father and I go out to play golf. In addition to that, he treats me more like a friend than a son. My mother has avoided communicating with David, despite the fact that she misses him. The most recent information I had on David came from my cousin, who stated that David had been begging everyone for money and that he had ultimately been forced to withdraw from college due to the fact that he was unable to pay the tuition. In addition to keeping a work as a mechanic on the side, he and Karen are currently living together. I suppose it's a good thing that they are raising Henry together, since it appears that they are doing so. I never brought up David in conversation with my parents, and they also never bring him up in conversation. According to everyone who has inquired, I am doing fairly well. Due to the fact that I was promoted at my job 2 months ago, my compensation has increased by a large amount. Despite the fact that I believe I still require time and space to heal, I have not been dating anyone. I've started attending treatment, so we'll see how that situation develops in the future. You are appreciated for watching. If you have not yet subscribed, please do so, and make sure to hit the notification bell so that you can remain informed about other stunning real-life tales that are occurring in your immediate vicinity.